Welcome back to the Mark Ferris Experience. Today we are speaking with Doug Thorpe. He is a executive coach and business advisor, and he delivers 5x return on investment on his services. So we're going to dig in on that. He has a staff of 5, and he's been coaching entrepreneurs for over 20 years here and has a wealth of knowledge that he's going to bring into the conversation today. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our discussion.
Right on. So I know you're a pro, you have your own podcast, and you've been doing this for years. And, you know, for our listeners, we're really curious to know a little bit about your backstory. So maybe you can go back to the beginning of what got you into entrepreneurialism.
Well, it's a pretty direct story, and I'll try to keep it brief. I first learned about entrepreneurship from my mother. I'm the only child of a single mom, and she had the guts, grit, and determination to leave her day job when I was still in 5th grade and go start a business. I mean, and this was not buying a business, but starting one. So she went through the whole startup game. She was an interior designer by trade, and that's what she really had a passion for doing. She was tired of doing it for other people and them making all the money, so she launched her own firm and did very well with it. But it was many, many years later that I understood that's what you call being an entrepreneur. And I had a front row seat to some of the challenges. I mean, if I was available, I was her right hand, and at an early age, I was installing drapes and hanging pictures and even slinging a few paintbrushes every now and then on the job she had, and had to do last minute touch-ups. But I watched her go through that, and that kind of sparked a fire in me. I thought, that's pretty cool. That's feels like a great way to go. And I knew it could work because we had a good life. I mean, we weren't overly wealthy or anything, but it was a very good life. And there was a degree of flexibility that she could orchestrate because she was in control of the whole thing.
That's amazing. And so was this Houston, Texas? So that's where you're located now?
No. I actually grew up in San Antonio, Texas. So we were living there, and I watched her build that business, and she actually morphed from doing residential services to commercial. She was invited to work with a large marketing agency that was building a whole new building from the ground up for their agency. So it was, that size business. It was a really good business, but she went in and did all of their interiors. And this was a marketing creative company that, we're talking about as her customers. That was a very interesting switch, if you will, but they loved what she did. She was invited to the big open house. There were a lot of commercial clients there, and one thing led to another, and she started picking up all these commercial businesses that wanted her to come do for them what she had done for the marketing firm. And she was gladly able to walk away from residential, which is a tough business if you're doing that. Interior design for residential is a very tough market. It's really hard to satisfy customers when you're doing that.
So Doug, tell us a little bit about what the common traits were that you think that made your mom successful, that was able to allow her to grow her business. Not everybody can, especially, making that transition from residential and the commercial side. But what do you think it was that your mom had that made her successful?
She had that undeniable fire in her belly. I mean, she had grit and determination and a very, very abundantly clear self-image and confidence in her own ability. And, her presence in a room, she was not a large woman by any means. She was about 5'3", 5'4", I believe. And, pretty frail. And I mean, not frail, that's not the right word. Petite, that's a better word for it. But she could command a room. I mean, heads turned when she walked in a room, and people paid attention. It wasn't just that she was an attractive woman, but people that knew her were ready to hear what she might have to say. So she carried that forward. And keep in mind, this was in the 60s, and women at work, there was a whole double standard for what got done and what anticipated roles were. And she busted most of the glass ceilings that she ever had to encounter. So, but she had a personality and a knack for being able to do that.
That's phenomenal. Especially back in that time as well. I think you had mentioned it, like back then, that's even a bigger deal that she was able to command a room. This fire in the belly and confidence. Do you think that's something that we'll say can be trained? That fire in the belly or that confidence? Is that something that you think that people, if they don't have that, is that something that's trainable, or is that just something you're born with?
Well, obviously it helps if you're born with it, but I'm not sure all that many people are born with it. I do think that's potentially a nurtured kind of behavior. And I can tell you what she did for me at a very young age. She, I would come home from school and I'd have some problem I was dealing with, whether it was a teacher or a staff member or even a fellow student. And she very early on said, "I'm not fighting your battles. If you want to stand up for this, you got to go back and do it." And she said, "I'll talk you through it. We'll talk about it. We'll explore your options, but I'm not doing this for you. You got to go do it if you really want it." And there was always that connection. If you really want it, you got to go do it. And uh, I learned early on to be bold and stand your ground, state your case, and you don't always get a positive outcome, but more often than not, you do. And if I had to kind of rough on the back of the envelope, keep score, I'd say 7 out of 10 were wins. So that's a pretty good, no major league batter has that kind of average.
Doug, I just put that one in my pocket. I'm going to adopt that from your mom. If you want it, you have to go and do it. I have 3 boys, and I say it in other words, but this to me is something that I think can be sticky. And it's so interesting that that's what you remember after all these years. And it's something that I think, in order for people to grab onto something and then hold on to it throughout their life, I think that if you can simplify the message into something like that, if you want it, you have to go and do it. And I think that's memorable enough and simple enough for the younger generation to be able to keep that their whole lives, like you did.
And I do. If I can throw in a bit of an editorial comment for current day events, I'm really worried about our younger generations and the way they're being nurtured, because one generation ago was the advent of helicopter parents. And I actually was still in a corporate situation when I was getting ready to interview somebody, and the parent showed up for the interview with them. And I went, "No, we're not doing this."
How did that? Tell me how that went. How did that go, Doug? When you saw, was it the mom that came in with the?
Automatic disqualification.
Yeah. So is it okay? I want to paint the picture here, because this kind of maybe classifies part of the concern for you when you see something like this. That was it a teenage boy that came in, and then, or was it like a young adult?
No, a young adult. I think he was probably 23, something like that.
And his mom came in with him
and had a college degree that was, certifiable. And we did the pre-screen by phone, which we had only talked to him on the phone, but he showed up for the interview, and I said, "Who's this with you?" And he said, "Oh, this is my mom." And I went, "Oh, okay, good to meet you. Could I, would you like a seat out here? We'll get you some water or whatever." And she goes, "No, I'm coming in." And I said, "Excuse me, no, I'm sorry, you're not."
And then what she say? Did they?
And she was pretty upset about it, but she took her seat, and I tried to talk to him, and I could tell it had just already derailed everything for him. And it wasn't a great moment for any of us, and put me in a very awkward spot. But just really fast forwarding to imagining, if I hired this guy, how often am I going to see his mom in my office? I don't need that.
Oh. Well, Doug, it reminds me when I played ice hockey, I remember that there was one or two parents generally on the team growing up that were those types of parents that were coming in, and the coaches, I heard them in the scouts as I became older and moved on along through the ranks. Funny enough, I actually finished my career down in Texas McAllen, the Killer Bees down there, the Central Hockey League. But growing up playing hockey, there was always one or two parents that were, getting their hands in, and the scouts and the coaches knew that if they scouted that player in, they knew that it was a two for one. So you get the parent and you'd get the player, and that was always a disadvantage for that player when they had their parent that was constantly buzzing around. And the coaches knew that they not only need to oversee the coach or the player, but they needed to oversee and take all of the flack and criticism and all, like, managing the parent as well. And I think what your mom did for you, although maybe at the time it seemed like, oh, it was a little bit harsh, perhaps, that was one of the best gifts that your mom gave you, is to teach you how to fish, and to teach you that along the way. It built the skill set and the muscle to be able to go out on your own and spread your own wings.
Well, if I could add to that quickly, the other big thing she did that I look back on with great admiration and respect, and again, as it was happening, I wasn't really clear. It just seemed natural. Because she was a single mom, she had a firm belief that for me to develop as a young man, I needed some mentorship, some male mentorship to help guide me. So she recruited mentors in my early days. And I'm not talking about particularly wildly successful or famous people. I'm just talking about salt of the earth, good quality individuals. And I've got a whole host of them that I can name before I graduated from high school that I had worked with. One guy was a neighbor. He taught me woodworking. He had this amazing shop in his backyard, his separate standalone building where all his tools were. And he would do all these projects, and he taught me that. Another guy taught me how to play golf and tennis. And another guy taught me fishing, and classic, male modeling. But what was always going on in those moments was other discussions about life. What do you need to know? What do you need to think about? And it ingrained in me an appreciation for being able to do that. So when I finally did pack up and go off to college, it was just natural for me to gravitate to people that I met that I could see something in that I admired and respected. And I wasn't afraid to walk up to them and say, "Hi, I'm Doug. I've watched you do X. Is there any chance you've got some time that you can spend with me and teach me what that is and how you did it and how you got there?" And again, through my college years, I have a whole handful of names I can name that I developed those kind of relationships with. And I continue that my whole life.
Doug, that is such a powerful concept. I love the idea. Well, there's two things there that, I mean, your mom, how she went and recruited mentors for you to build the model and to bring into your life. It's interesting because I have three boys, and for me, it's been more so, you read this book, or I'm going to teach you this or this, more so me. But I never really thought about bringing in other really strong leaders and actually introduce them and make those connections like your mom did for you. So that's like a really great nugget that I pulled there. But I mean, the other item as well, I'm curious, I have a kind of a follow-up question. Of the 10 people that you would have walked up to and said, "Hey, do you have any time?" What would you say out of 10 would say, "You know what," or at least we're open to be able to take one step further with you? Because I think, and the reason I ask that, because there's a lot of young adults and anybody, when they get into a field, it's like, I don't want to bother them. So I'm curious, out of like 10, what was the response there?
100%. And I have pulled that forward, and now let me clarify, it was 100%. There were a few that said, "I would be more than happy to do it. I just can't do it right now. We'll have to defer this." But yes, my answer is yes, but it's just a scheduling issue. which, okay, that's fair, because I'm asking you for free time, so you're going to have to tell me when your time is free. But I've used that in my own coaching with people to encourage them. Don't be afraid to walk up to those guys, even the uber busy business owner or executive that you might know. If they truly have an attribute that you admire, that you would like to add to your leadership persona or your effectiveness as a human being, ask them. Go ask. Now, okay, you ask 10, maybe you do get a no, but there's nothing wrong with that. You got 9 other yeses and 9 other opportunities to do something bigger and better.
Oh, man, that is such a strong piece of advice right there. It's so powerful because I think a lot of people is like, oh, I can never do that, or I'm going to need to pay them money, or they're too busy, or I don't want to bother them. And I love that. And when I think back to anybody that's asked me, from whatever success I've had, and somebody that's getting into it, if I'll spend time to actually walk them through. I was just speaking with somebody yesterday, and he's got X amount saved, and he was talking about he wanted to invest in one of our apartment deals. And I said, okay, how much do you have? And I walked through everything, got his full scope. I said, here's what I'd recommend. I actually told him he's renting currently right now. I actually suggested go spend all your focus and time and just go buy a house. And I walked him through the whole process, got him introduced to it. And it was one of those things, I didn't need to do that, but like I felt really good throughout that conversation. My wife after's like, "Oh, that was good. You helped them out, and spent a good like 40 minutes with him on the phone." But at the end of the call, I'm like, "Oh, I feel good from that." And I think that these advisors, that they wouldn't get that question a lot. It's not like they're getting people all through the day asking them for that. So that's part of the attraction with it as well, I think.
Yeah. And what my experience has been, and many that I've coached that have tried it have come back to say the same thing. Good leaders who are demonstrating good behaviors of leadership and direction are willing to share. They're willing to give back, and for them, it's not paying it forward. They're kind of paying it back. And inevitably, the ones that are really good in their leadership role, truth be told, they had mentors and they know it. They know the value of having
Right.
that extra
Right.
voice at the table. So when somebody approaches them and says, "Can you help me?" they're more than willing to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Really powerful. Love that. So, okay, so now let's move on a little bit. So you went through college, so you had really strong mentorship growing up. So you had such a strong foundation. You get out of school. What was the kind of that first step? What did you just start a business right away, or did you kind of work your way up?
No,
Take us through that next
first
stage.
first step for me, growing up in San Antonio, Texas, in my time there, San Antonio was a big military town. At that time, there were 5 different bases in San Antonio. I think it was 3 Air Force installations and 2 Army. So everybody you met or knew had some connection to the military, and it just made sense that I would pursue a military career. I went to high school ROTC. I got in the leadership training there, and then that qualified me to get an Army scholarship to go to college. Interesting side nugget, and I'm going to say this, and people can take it for whatever they will. Because of what I was able to accomplish in my ROTC in school, I mean, I worked my way up to be commander of the corps that we had there. And so as a senior, I was the number 1 cadet. And that got me qualified to go to West Point.
Wow.
And when I got my paperwork for West Point, I sat down, I opened it up, and my mom could tell there was something wrong. And she said, "What's going on?" And I looked at this paperwork and I said, "Mom, this paperwork says I can go to West Point. But if I go to West Point, that means I'm not going to go to Texas A&M. And that's where I really wanted to go. And I wanted to join the Corps of Cadets at A&M. That had been a kind of a lifelong vision for me. And my mom, in her own inevitable way, said, "Then don't go to West Point." Just end of story. Just, you know, if you want it, go get it. I mean, we're kind of back to that, So I respectfully declined the appointment to West Point and took a scholarship instead to go to A&M. And again, was able to accomplish some good things, pretty much everything I had set out to do. I wasn't head of the corps at A&M, but I was a fairly high ranking senior, when I graduated. So, very happy experience. But the catch of having that scholarship was I had to go on active duty. So that was fine. I was commissioned a lieutenant in the Army and served on active duty for 4 years active, and then 2 more reserve. So total of 6 before I was able to get out. And I did decide while I was on duty that after all, that wasn't going to be the lifestyle I really wanted to live all of my life. So I did opt to get out when my time was up, but it was a great experience. Learned a lot again. And I shopped for mentors, even in the Army. I met senior officers around me that I connected with. I did the same thing to them that I had done all the way through school. If they had something that I really admired and respected, I approached them about it and asked if they could coach me a little bit. And they did. They were more than willing. And it was a great experience. But when I left the military, I didn't really know what I wanted to do because that had not been the plan. And I had a college friend who was working for a large regional bank in Houston. And I interviewed with them and was hired immediately because many of the leaders at that bank were ex-military, and they had an affinity for that experience, and they had their own vision of the value that being an officer meant. And so when I showed up, they were happy to give me an offer, and I worked there for 20 years.
Wow. Okay, so with your going back to your mom, what a beautiful, beautiful lady. You got a glimpse into the type of person she was, with when she said like, well, then don't go. And I think that is a good lesson, I think, for the parents listening as well. It's like for me as well, as like, the bottom line is that whatever your kids' visions are and what they truly want and they're passionate about, you may have other, we'll say, visions for them, what's best for them, but ultimately it's like, you're your own person, you make your own decisions, and I got your back from that. But I would think that in that moment, that was probably like a relief that there was some agreement there, and she saw that in you, that that's what you really wanted. How important was that agreement that you got at that point?
Oh, it was huge. And, it carried with me further as I went through my college experience. I ran into a lot of my fellow students who were there on campus with us at A&M, but it was against their own will. Basically, the parents had said, if you want to go to college, the only one I'm paying for is A&M.
Okay.
And
Right.
I know that's a statement that's true in most every major university campus. There are students that are there because that's the same thing that their parents said. And there's this affinity for the school and school spirit and all that. Great, but as I experienced that and I watched how miserable my friends were that were there under duress, I said to myself, when I have kids, I'm never going to do that to them. And so as my kids grew up and became college age and we started talking about what school you wanted to go to, it was a wide open discussion.
Hmm.
I didn't put any boundaries on it or anything. I just said, let's start with the basics. Where do you want to go and why do you want to go there?
Hmm.
And 2 of my 5, I've got a blended family. I've got 5 kids in the blended family, but they became my kids before college. So we went through the whole college thing together, all 5 of them. And 2 of the 5, partway through the process, they came to me and they said, we're kind of surprised you're not steering us to A&M. And I said, I'll help you go to A&M if you want to. I mean, I still have connections. We can do that. But no, I'm very serious about this. Needs to be your decision. What do you think is going to be best for you? And I, interestingly, I don't know how many in your audience understand there is a rivalry here in Texas between Texas A&M and the University of Texas, 100-year rivalry. I had two boys. One grew up believing he was going to be an Aggie. The other grew up believing he was going to be a Longhorn. And when the time came, they switched.
Yeah,
So
it's a big.
there's karma in the universe,
Yeah.
there's a balance there in our family, but you never know until you really open the door and give them the honest opportunity to explore and make the choice.
Doug, what would you say would be, maybe a couple really good things that you did that now that the kids have grown up, you're like, that was a massive payoff? Like, I'm always looking for highly leveraged things. One of the things that I think is for me that I do with my boys that I'm starting to see benefit, like I've seen benefits of that, but I think is going to pay off is that every day when I see them, I stop what I'm doing, I walk up to them and I give them a hug, I tell them I love them. And so, highly leveraged, activities, so to speak. But what would be for yourself that you've seen massive payoff that you did when, the kids were younger?
There were two things I can point to specifically. One is a little bit of a catchy phrase, and I wish I could claim authorship of it. I can. I learned it in a Sunday school lesson many, many years ago. I taught my kids the principle of come home before dark. And that didn't mean you're 12 years old, the sun goes down, you got to be home. That's not what I meant. The deeper meaning was if you feel darkness surrounding you in whatever situation you find yourself in, get out of there and come home before the darkness happens. And one night, my middle son had already graduated from school and had moved into and gotten a job and moved into an apartment with a couple of roommates. And one night, my wife and I are sound asleep, and we hear a knock on our front door. It's about 2 a.m. And we go to the door, and we could tell he was a little bit inebriated. But first words out of his mouth was, "It's dark. I need to come home." And we brought him in. We said, "What in the world's going on?" And he said, "We had a party at our apartment, and it got totally out of control. And I'm confident the police are going to be there soon, and I had to leave." Mm-hmm. And as the story unfolded, the police were not called, but damage had been done to the apartment. There was a pretty big mess, and he, in the next 2 weeks, he separated from the guys that were his roommates. He said, "I don't know how I'm going to do this financially, but I know I can't live with these guys anymore. They still think they're in college, and I'm ready to grow up and move on. And I don't ever want to do this again." So that, like I said, the first words out of his mouth was, "It's almost dark. I needed to come home."
Wow. What a great story. What a great, what a blessing when he came and said that, he knew that he had, you know, loving dad, loving, like your parents, loving parents there for that could be there for them. I think not many kids out there would think like that. And they would just try and handle it on their own without having, that support there when they needed it.
Yeah. Well, my daughter is another one of similar story. She had gotten engaged, and we were well down the path of planning the wedding. And one day in the middle of the day, she called me and she said, "Dad, are you at home?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." She said, "Is there any chance I could come over?" And I said, "Sure. What's going on?" And she said, "I don't think I'm getting married." And I said, "Okay, come on." So she came over and proceeded to tell me that she had discovered her fiance had an alter life going on. and it was something she didn't want to have anything to do with. And she called off the wedding, and I couldn't have been more proud of her for because how many people have gotten on to that merry-go-round and gotten all the way down to the altar, realizing it's probably not what they should be doing, but because of all the social pressures and peer pressures and everything else, it's like, I can't stop this train. And they go through with it only to live a really miserable existence.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Whoever you select, I tell the boys that's one of the biggest decisions you're going to make. You want success in business, you better make sure you have the right spouse. You want, happiness, you better make sure. You want health, like all like it I think that, if the younger generation really understood the importance of getting it right, I think that, there'd be I mean, for me, I can't say more time necessarily. It's not always about more time. It's just knowing, like, 100%. You don't need to go asking anybody for permission. Like, that that's the right person. And with your daughter coming as well, it speaks very highly of you that she could call you and have that trust, at that moment as well, and having that support and probably agreement as well was probably a big thing, taking that first step towards you. And then you would have, I'm sure, had a blessing for her when she did it.
Well, and leading up to that was discussing the notion of red flags. When you're in a relationship, you get warning signs if there are defects, either in the relationship or in the person that you're choosing to partner with. And that's true in business as well, by the way. So if you're anticipating creating a partnership to go into a business, if you see red flags, they are not going away. Doing the business, getting married, doing the thing is not going to eliminate the red flag.
What would be like one or two red flags that perhaps would be like a common thing that maybe, business people miss when they're going into a partnership? Is there one or two things that would be examples of red flags?
I think the big one that stands out for me, and I reflect on this even from my banking days, I saw it with our bank customers and that were in partnerships, just small little slippages in integrity, like, hey, Mark, I'll take care of that, and don't worry about it. I got it. And then 2 days later, you say to me, Doug, did you get that thing done? Oh, no, I'm sorry. It got away from me. And I'll do it. I'll take care of it. And, maybe it's 2 or 3 more times before it eventually gets done. I consider that a kind of integrity flaw. If your partner's going to not be true to their word, I think that's a red flag. And yeah, you can give them grace once or twice. Things do happen. We're all guilty of it from time to time. But if there's any form of a pattern there, regardless of how large or small the matter might be, I think that's a red flag.
100%. There's a really good example as well. I was speaking with another entrepreneur, and we were talking about partnerships, and he had said he was about to go into a partnership with somebody, and he noticed that there was an elderly lady that was walking in, and the potential partner didn't hold the door open for the elderly lady and just walked right past. And he's like, he caught that as a red flag. That was a red flag going in, because if he's treating people like that, there's, what's going to stop him from treating a partner like that. So I really like that about watching for red flags when you're kind of in that early dating phase, so to speak. So that's a really good example. So let's transition now. So you worked at the bank for a number of years, and so you've been coaching and training up leaders for, well, over 20 years now. And so when did you make the switch, and what made you make the switch into, okay, I'm going in and I'm going to help grow people at this point in my life?
There were really 2 steps in between leaving the bank, taking an early retirement when it was offered to me at the bank, and then becoming a coach and a full-time advisor. I I did what most bankers do when they get out of from behind the mahogany desk. I became a consultant, and my whole first, I don't know, 4 years as a consultant was working for my former bank customers, helping them with their businesses. But then that grew into some other things, and what I was discovering as and being a consultant put me on the road a lot for the first time. When I was at the bank, I wasn't really on the road. I mean, I was in our immediate geography, territory wise, going out to visit clients, but I wasn't crossing state lines to do that. But as a consultant, I was, and I would be out away from home for weeks at a time, that sort of thing. But what I discovered, a lot of my consulting clients were calling me into their office and shutting the door and saying, "Doug, I need some help on something else." And they just wanted to talk. And I found that intriguing, that here these were leaders in their business, but I started seeing patterns in the issues that they were expressing. And for a long time, I was honored and happy that they would be willing to ask me, that they found trust and confidence in me to do so. And I would try to do what I could with them, but I was doing it without any particular training other than, oh, I've done that before. Let me kind of help you through it. And as I started to get tired of the consulting, I did decide to go more onto my entrepreneurial bent. I finally, two of my consulting gigs, in late lasting consulting gigs, had me helping companies build businesses, a whole new subsidiary business. And it specifically had to do with some business process outsourcing platforms. And that's a mouthful to say, but I had kind of perfected a model for what that could be. And I came home one day and I said to my wife, I said, "What if we started our own company doing that? It's a pretty neat model, and let's go do that." And she agreed and thought it was a neat idea. So we started our own company. That was in like 2003. And we went through the classic startup phase. We went out raising angel investor money. We had a technology investment we had to make, and we did that, and we got the company started, and we grew it up pretty well. We had 200 client companies nationwide that we were doing back office outsourcing for. And then the crash of '08 happened. And the piece I left out, my service company was related to the mortgage finance industry. And if anybody remembers the dynamics of the '08 crash, mortgage and banking was ground zero for the crash. And my 200 client companies nationwide collectively lost 75% of their business in 45 days. The whole system nationwide shut down, stopped operating until the dust could settle and people could see their way clear to resume operations. And so there was a window there, late '07 and all of '08, that most people could not get a mortgage loan because no banks were lending against mortgages at that time, because there had been a bubble in the housing market that burst, and that just collapsed that whole segment. So I had to shut down the business. I went to my investors and I said, "I've talked to every chairman of all 200 companies. They don't see an end in sight. That means we're not going to see any new volume or new business, and nobody else in the market is generating anything. I'm not going to write any more checks to fund this company. I don't expect you to write any more checks. I say we call it a day and shut it down." And they all agreed. So that put me in a little bit of a journey of soul searching and what did I need to do next in a bad market. And I chose to take my entrepreneurial spirit and I created a nonprofit organization for job seekers, of all things. I mean, the unemployment rate had risen to double digits everywhere in the country, and very good people, for the first time in their lives, had lost their jobs, and they were hungry and didn't know what to do or how to do it. So I created this organization that was going to coach and teach people how to work the job market in a bad market. And that's what we did. And over the next 4 years, we coached over 4,500 people in our
Wow.
geographic region down here in Houston. We developed a couple of models and ideas that actually worked, even in a bad economy. And we had a 66% success rate in getting people placed in jobs, even in a double-digit unemployment economy.
That model, if you were to summarize it in like a few key points, because it sounds like it was really successful, what would be kind of the main key points that they did in order to be successful? Like
I,
that's a really high percentage.
I can name it easy. We developed a 6-step model. We called it Strive, and it's an acronym. And I've got a small book on Amazon about it. It is the Strive model for job search success is the name of the book, if anybody's needing it or looking at it. But the very first step that we figured out was we encouraged people to do a survey of who they were really at their core. Their job title and their job identity had been stripped away and lost. So that's gone. That's off the table. So the question is, who are you really? How do you think you're wired? What do you believe in? What do you really want to do? And we had an assessment process we encouraged people to go through to reframe and redefine who they were. And what we discovered was, as people earnestly did that work, they revealed something wholly different than maybe what they had been doing. And also, some of the common themes that emerged were people were realizing that they had gotten into a particular industry as a young person because that was the first job that was available, almost like I ended up in banking because it's the first job that was available. Um, but after 20 years, they didn't really like it. They weren't really energized by it. They weren't really excited, but they had been given opportunity to advance. So they just stayed on the train and kept scaling up. And now when the company decided to let them go, they had nothing. But when they did this exploration and survey of who they really believe they were, they could now start telling a story that had a whole different level of energy to it. So that when they showed up for an interview, energy was way up the scale, and they weren't beat down, they weren't discouraged, they weren't frustrated, but they were eager to find that new path and new direction. And a lot of the people that were successful in following our program went sometimes 180 degrees opposite of where they had been, and found great success doing it.
Right on. So, okay, survey is S. What's T?
Yeah. T is to target. Now that you kind of know what you are, you have to do the work to target what kind of companies need you. The thing you've now defined yourself to be, what kind of company needs that? And that becomes your target. And you'll notice we've done 2 steps now. We haven't even done a resume yet. And, so resume is step number 3, but it's only after you've defined your target industry or target market should you start writing your resume, because the resume needs to be styled to match that market. And it may be a whole new set of keywords you've got to include, or terminology you have to present in your resume. But it's only after you survey, establish yourself, then think about your targets that you're really ready to write the resume. And then the I is the interview part. And we had a whole lot of different things we taught people about interviewing. We really encourage people to get ready for so-called behavior-based interviewing. And that's when the interviewer would ask you or say something like, Mark, tell me about a time when, and they'd go ... and they'd fill in a scenario. That was becoming a very popular style of interviewing at the time, and it has since prevailed. It is still a very popular way to do interviewing. And it's far more meaningful than just saying, hey, Mark, tell me something about yourself. Well, that's a worthless interview question. in my mind. We do the interview, and then the V is value, and value goes kind of like value proposition. We taught and coached a lot about building a personal brand that you could present during the interview, and you could present a value proposition that meant something to the company you're talking to. And it didn't leave anything to doubt and what we used to always say is you don't want your interviewer connecting the dots. If, if you can figure out what they need and you can show them how your set, your skill, your brand fits that need, you connect the dots for them. So
Making it simple
make it
enough so that
simple.
anybody can understand it. That's powerful idea.
And then the last letter E stands for engage, and this is the proverbial after you get hired, how do you make it stick? And we had some steps and recommendations for properly engaging in a new job so that you do become a valuable member of that team and a value contributor to the organization you've joined. And so we hit that on the back end.
Yeah. Doug, thanks for taking us through. I think that, I mean, this is such a powerful concept for the listeners out there. I highly recommend picking this book up and, just applying. Not only, I mean, that you could look at this, okay, this is an employee, but I think understanding this is actually, there's a lot of similarities to starting your own business. And so how can you connect the dots? So now uh, you're coaching entrepreneurs and leaders on the other side of the table, so to speak. And so, what this really kind of relates to in a big way, what I'm seeing is, whenever you're doing any sort of branding, whether it's, story branding, you have Inside Advantage is a really great book written by Robert Bloom. And he talks a lot about that, about getting clear what the market is and what we'll say, key differentiator is. What is that for you? But how can this maybe be flipped? And have you connected this to like the business entrepreneurship and the leadership side of things?
Absolutely. And what I'll say is there's very much a connection with the person that thinks they want to be an entrepreneur or they're already there trying to do the work. There's still an important opportunity to, again, do that step one assessment of what are you really about and what are you really doing. And there's been a lot of evolution in tools and abilities since I did the jobs ministry that I had. There is now an institute called the Why Institute. Everybody is familiar with Simon Sinek's Start with Why. And there's an interesting story. There was a young man dentist at the time that first heard Simon's TED Talk. And he called Simon and he said, I love your message. Do you have an assessment to help me learn my why? And at that time, Simon's answer was, nope, I don't have that. He had a great story in the why story, and it made a lot of sense to people. But moving forward, so Dr. Gary Sanchez began his own journey exploring and interviewing over 1,000 people. And he discovered in that survey of over 1,000 people, there are really only 9 whys in the universe. And what he has done, he has taken that premise and he's moved it forward. He now has an assessment tool that he calls the Why Operating System. And if you take his survey, and I have it offered on my own website, it's a $97 package. It's not expensive. You can go online, you can take the survey, and the Why Operating System survey will tell you your how, your why, how, and what. It'll give you all 3 pieces. And to give you an example, and these terms may sound a little bit, I don't know what you'd call it, but I'll give you an example so you can get the idea. When I took the survey, my why showed up to be better way. I am motivated to find a better way for all things all the time. My how is by mastery. When I get locked in on something, I don't just want to know a little bit about it. I want to know all of it. So that's mastery. And then my what I do is to contribute. I love the opportunity to serve people, help bring value to others. So I look at life first with that lens of better way. If you started describing a deal to me, Mark, I promise you my brain would be going, is that the best way to structure that deal? And I'm not trying to be critical. I'm curious, but in my profile report, my caution is don't be critical. It's okay to be curious, but don't sound like you're critical because you're asking all these questions. And so, that's good to know. I mean, but also a very sort of mundane example of my better way. When my wife gives me my little errand list for Saturday morning, Doug, would you go out and take care of all these things? Okay, sure. And I get the list. Can you guess what the first thing I do on that list is?
Or
I sequence it.
You organize it. Yeah.
I organize it. I sequence it. What's the best way I can get all this done in an optimum amount of time with the best benefit? And if somewhere on that list is buy ice cream at the store, guess what? That's going to be my last stop.
Right.
Because I want to get the ice cream home before it melts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Or there's less of a chance you're going to eat it on the way home too, right?
Well, that's right.
That's very smart, man, on that. That's that's powerful. I think that, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that just start and they don't have, we'll call it the fuel to keep them going. And they haven't really tapped into that thing that really drives them. So I love that. I love that there's an assessment out there to help people find it. And so what would be the web for your website there? What would be the website for the listeners to go check it
my
out?
link for that opportunity is dougthorpe.com. That's THORPE.com/why. dougthorpe.com/why.
Well, okay, let's transition this a little bit. And that was really great nugget you just dropped there. And you explained the Strive strategy as well and how applicable that is to the entrepreneurialism side of it as well. But let's talk a little bit about investing. I'm curious to get any investment advice that you've seen that through the years that you would give to an entrepreneur that is perhaps, they're growing their business, they're making really great money, and let's just say they're doing all the right things. They're investing back in their business. They have we'll say emergency fund, right? But they have some extra, and there's so many different opportunities out there. It can be overwhelming. What advice would you have for entrepreneurs when it comes down to investment based on your own experience?
Clearly, there are a lot of different investment vehicles and programs and platforms going on now. And I'm inclined to say, putting my banker hat on, I'm inclined to say most of them are really good. However, there are a lot of bad actors in that space as well. And so it is very, very difficult for someone to independently take a sum of money and confidently go put it in place somewhere else. And so I guess my first quick caution is really align with a good advisor that knows that space, knows the players, knows the credible opportunities that are out there. But there's another thing that is getting a lot of press these days. It's entrepreneurship by acquisition. And it's this dynamic of all the baby boomers, like my age group, they built good, strong businesses, but they're now ready to cash out and retire or move on to their next chapter of life. And there's no one generationally in the family to take it over. So there are businesses that are ripe for the opportunity. So my point in all that is, back to your scenario, if an entrepreneur's already built up a business in a certain niche, I would say first step is go explore whether or not there are ancillary businesses that are complementary to yours or competing with you that might in fact be for sale. buy an independent owner and see if you can't negotiate a purchase with them. And here in the US, the Small Business Administration has a very lucrative offer to help fund the acquisition. So that entrepreneur you're talking about, let's just pick a hypothetical number. Let's say they've got 300,000 they're willing to invest in a new way. Well, you can take that 300,000 and with an SBA bank loan, a 7A bank loan, you can buy what could be a 3 million up to $5 million business. That could be your purchase price of the business. Now, you're taking debt and you're going to hope the new business has the cash flow to support that debt, and I wouldn't recommend doing it otherwise. But I've seen many of those businesses do in fact cover that, and they give you the debt service coverage you need so that you can adequately make that investment, leverage the money you can get from the SBA, and take advantage of those great opportunities.
Makes a lot of sense to me, Doug. And it's very similar about how we buy these larger apartment multifamily deals that, we'll go in these 100-unit apartment buildings and we'll be able to identify an existing operator that's not doing a good job running the business of the property. And so we have skill sets to be able to go in and identify and see what potential upside there is. And we know if we do A, B, and C by looking at the comparable properties in the area that we can increase the overall income and thus the value of that building. And I think if you have a skill set in a certain area in business and you can peer into that business and you can see how they're operating, you're like, ooh, this is already cash flowing from day one. It's already making money. But if I can go in and add value based on my skill sets that I have, well, that's a value add play. And you can go in and really, do a really good job. And even if you did nothing, it's still cash flowing to make. But if you can add value and take your skill sets and do that, I think that's a great piece of advice. And not only that, like you had said, there's a lot of retirees happening, and there's a lot of there's a market for that, for business owners that want to get out and their kids don't want to take the business over. And I've heard that outside of this conversation many, many times.
Right. No, it's a very real phenomenon. And to your point, the other thing that I have seen happen every time on every transaction I've been a part of, the seller might be a wonderful human being, really, salt of the earth kind of character and all that, but they've taken the business up to a level and turned it into more of a lifestyle business for them. I don't want to do anything extra. I don't want to create any more headaches. Here's where I am. And, we're talking about a business that could be cash flowing, I don't know, 500, 700, maybe $1 million a year, but they don't want to do anything else. But if the new owner comes in, buys that business and assembles the team, and first thing out of his mouth says, do you guys have any extra ideas? 100% of the time, they always do. They've got ideas because they're the crew that's out in the field doing the work. They know some opportunities that might be existing as the market has shifted, but the former owner wasn't willing to entertain it. So the new owner can take advantage of that energy and agree to do some of those new initiatives. And it doesn't necessarily cost them a lot of extra money to do it, but they can make some very near-term investments with the cash flow they've got, do these things. And I've seen businesses 2x their bottom line in 18 months.
Oh man. So this is, Doug, this is such a powerful idea, because the more conversations I have with entrepreneurs that start from scratch and they say if they were going to do it again, or they've started from scratch and then they bought other companies that have already laid the foundation, they said all day long, they'll pick the strong foundation, or the ones that have gone through that early struggle phase where it's already cash flowing, there's already a proven market for it. They'll take that all day long, and you don't need to buy it all in cash. I mean, you can have, some upfront, you can finance it. You can, the buyout can be over a few years. And
yeah, you can negotiate seller notes on the deal.
Yeah. So I think that this is such a powerful idea that's not talked a lot about, with when it comes down to entrepreneurialism and I'm going to start, I'm going to start my own business. Sometimes it makes sense to just take a little money off the table of your savings and go buy something that's existing. And then you start like a year or 2 years ahead. And through a lot of through a lot of early struggle, pain, we'll call it, you can save you a lot.
Right, right. No, it's a very rich opportunity that if someone thinks, and I'm thinking particularly about the corporate citizen that's been working 5, 10, 15 years, built up a little nest egg and say, I've really got the entrepreneurial bug. I really want to go do this. I would argue this is probably the top of the list of the first thing you ought to look at is the opportunity to go buy something that's pre-existing.
Mm.
Don't wrestle with coming up with, the next Uber or the next Apple or all those world changing ideas. Those would be great if you can get it, but they're few and far between. But rather, if it's really about building some personal wealth, take the nest egg you've got and go find your first business, and then think long term about building a portfolio of those businesses.
I love this idea. And so the world is your oyster. So, last question before we get into rapid fire, because I'm really interested in this, Doug, and it's not talked a lot about. And with your experience, because you have a vast array of, entrepreneurs that you're speaking with, and you see different types of businesses as well. So, in today's market, so we're 2025, where do you think are the best areas from like an industry standpoint that if you were to go buy a business, where are you seeing some of the biggest opportunities now to perhaps take that idea that we're just talking about and to go in and to say buy a business if there's an entrepreneur that's thinking about this?
There's two sectors that I've been involved in that I see the most stable opportunities in. One is what is broadly called the home services sector. Some people call them the boring businesses, plumbers, electricians, HVAC companies, um, remodeling, siding, roofing, those kind of services. It is real interesting. Now, depending on which one you pick, you might have licensing issues you've got to work through. And licensing changes by state, it's not a federal deal. So you've really got to explore that during due diligence. But I have known a number of people. I've known people that came out of the tech world. They bought a plumbing company. I knew a guy that was a programmer, IT programmer, and bought a landscaping company and doing great work with it. And it is a major shift. But the goal is, and what I remind these people, it's not a question of you being able to become the operator. You need to have the mindset you're the investor
Mm.
taking over this business. And one of the first things you really ought to look for during due diligence and valuation is, does the business already have a general manager in place, or are they very near being able to hire a general manager so that I'm not going to have to be the operator on a day by day basis? I will have a general manager that I can count on. So we are talking a business. It's a little bigger. It's not the one man chucking a truck kind of business, but it's the one that's got a team of people already operating, and they have a little bit of infrastructure. Maybe they have a field supervisor, superintendent, or something like that that you can work with. But looking for those kind of businesses, I think, is the real answer.
Home services.
Oh, and there was a second one I wanted to mention. Manufacturing, I've seen some really interesting opportunities in as well. There are many, many different kinds of manufacturing. I know a gentleman who bought a food processing plant, and they've long time, 40-year history in the company. Owner was aging out and wanting to liquidate. Really solid team, good product. A little bit nichey, but nonetheless, good upside. And I've seen cabinet makers, I've seen flooring manufacturers, a number of different, products that you can look at on the manufacturing front.
Yeah. Doug, this is really helpful. I think that gives the listeners a very good place to start. Uh, the home services and the manufacturing side. So thanks for sharing. All right, we have a rapid fire. Got 3 quick questions here, and then we're going to wrap up. You ready?
Okay, fire away.
All right. So you have so much experience, Doug, and I'm a big reader. I'm curious to know what book has made the biggest impact in your career.
Ooh, uh, I do get asked that question a lot, and I got to tell you, it's hard to put my finger on it, but because so much at the core of everything I do, it's about leadership and developing leaders all around us. I am a big fan of John Maxwell and the work that he's done, and I guess if you're going to use his name, you got to start with 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. That's a very powerful book. It really sets sort of a master framework of what leaders need to be.
Yeah, 100%. It's incredible to see how many books he's written. Like over 50 books in his career.
Yeah,
He's a real legend in the business.
yeah.
All right, second question. How would others describe you in 3 words?
Ooh, I'm trying to remember. I actually did that exercise a few years ago. I asked friends to do just that, and I'm not sure I've still got the card on it. I think they would say trustworthy, loyal, and friendly, probably.
Yeah. No, I know I'm putting you on the spot. I'd say humble as well is a really good one. That's probably hard for you to come up with the 3 words talking about yourself, right? So, all right. And then last question, what advice would you have for the entrepreneur out there that's thinking about getting into business, or perhaps they want to take their business to the next level?
I think it is important to get outside of yourself and try to self diagnose founderitis. Founderitis is kind of a pride of creation and pride of authorship in what you've done. If it's truly been a startup story, I think you got to get out of that. And the way you do it is you find a circle of trusted advisors that know enough about what you're trying to do that they can give you some objective insights and suggestions. But be willing to kind of open up and lay your ideas on the table and take the feedback. And if a majority says the next thing you're thinking about is not a great idea, here's why, then take that to heart.
All right, Doug, this was a powerful interview. How can the listeners reach out and connect with you if they want to take advantage of some of your services?
Yeah, the best way for those in the entrepreneurial focus, go to my company website, Headway Exec. That's headwayexec.com. If you're looking for individual leadership development support or working with your own leadership team in your business, go to my personal site at dougthorpe.com. And there's slightly different angles and information available, but check each one of them out.
That's great, Doug. Well, I really appreciated this conversation. The time just flew by, and I was like, I want to keep mining that wisdom that you have. You have such a beautiful mannerism about how you communicate. So I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
That's great. Well, thanks guys for listening. If you like the show, please share and subscribe to the channel where we're building a community of up and coming entrepreneurs. And just remember, the fastest way to build wealth is to grow your business, invest in real estate. I love you guys.